What would you say if I ask you, where do you think your identity is used in the modern world? For example, if you want to get access to your online bank account, what do you use? If you want to get access to your social media accounts, what do you use? And if you are a user from the corporate world, if you want to get access to your organization's resources like services and applications, what do you use? And more important now that we live in a modern world is if you want to share information with externals, and not only with external parties like users and other organizations, but also if you want to share your information with your co-workers outside of your organization's boundary, what do you use? Or inside, what do you use? Your user identity. What I'm saying is that identity is the key technology to enable businesses. My name is Arnold Martinez, and today we'll be talking about how to use the Microsoft Identity Solutions to provide your user identity and management for your organization. When you are considering some aspects for your identity management solutions, there are, let's say, like 3 specific requirements that are necessary to consider when you are defining and designing your strategy for managing your user identities. Let's say, for example, we want a solution that helps us to manage the users and identities from a central location, from a central portal. We don't want to be configuring accounts in one system and configuring another user account for the end users in another system. We want to have a central location where we can manage, we can add users, remove users, modify users and permissions and groups, all of that. Manage all the activities related to identity management. The second option, the second requirement that we need to accomplish with your security, with your solution, is we need to also provide the security to the user identities. I mean, we are going to provide access to the organization's resources, but we need to do it in a secure manner. If your organization needs to comply with some privacy capabilities, then your identity solution must also help you to provide and accomplish with those requirements. And also, at this third requirement, we also want the solutions to help us to integrate with some old user identity solutions. As we are moving from, there are many organizations that are still on premises and they are doing the transition from on premises to the cloud. Most of them are doing something that is called hybrid solutions, which means that we need solutions to still continue using our identities that we have already created in Active Directory and also provide them access to the cloud resources and just expand and maximize what you have at this time. So having these 3 requirements into account, it's important to keep those in mind. So we can say that there are 3 scenarios, specific scenarios, and they are very common that we are going to be talking. The first one is local users. What about if you want to provide your organizations to your local users access, you want to synchronize them, you want to implement a hybrid solution? What options do we have if you want to do that? Today we are talking about Microsoft solutions, and the scenario number 2 is if you want to provide to external user access to your organization's resources. What options do we have? Which in this case would be the scenario that everyone's know is called business to consumer, right? Because we want to provide access to our applications and services to some external users. And the third scenario is how can we interact with other external organizations if we want to get access to not only one user but all the users from another organization. then it's called business to business. And Microsoft through Azure Active Directory helps you to achieve all these three scenarios. Today we'll be talking just about the first one, about how to provide and what considerations, basic considerations that we need to have if you want to get access or provide access to your end users. Microsoft provides something that is called Azure AD Connect, which is a piece of software that will help you to define the integration between. It will help you to do the synchronizations and integration, let's say, from your on-premises to Azure Active Directory to the cloud. Azure AD Connect basically provides some options that helps you to easily manage your user identities and enables different scenarios you can define and configure. Azure AD Connect basically will be pulling the changes from Active Directory on premises. If you have some changes that you want to do on premises and you want to replicate them to Azure, that's something that you do through Azure AD Connect. So there are three specific scenarios or questions related to Azure AD Connect and how you want to manage your user identities. The first one is, what objects will you replicate? I mean, if you have on premises your user account and you want them to have access to cloud resources, in this case we can have the user accounts and the objects that needs to be replicated. In the case of Azure AD Connect, you have the options to replicate, for example, if you want to replicate some specific users, if you want to replicate some groups, some organizational units. It depends, right? In my case, I worked with companies that they want to start like a proof of concepts. They want to do a pilot, so we reduce the users. We take some specific users to replicate to the cloud. So there are other times where some specific applications require some specific attributes, and then you also have the options to select and define what objects you need to replicate to the cloud. And the second question is, what type of user synchronization will you use? Okay, we have different alternatives where you need to consider when you are synchronizing your users, and it depends also for how you want to manage the users and the passwords, and also the third question, which is the fault tolerance questions. So, but let's focus on the second options. What type of user synchronization? Basically, Azure Active Directory allows you to use three types of authentication, which is let's say, managed authentication, which in this case, the authentication is managed by Azure AD, but also you have the option, for example, to configure something that is called password hash synchronization, which is in this case the simple mechanisms that you can use. Okay, which means that it allows your on-premises users that are replicated to the cloud. It allows you to consume the different applications and resources that you have already in the cloud, which means that when you configure password hash synchronization, it only synchronize a hash of the password, which means there is no clear text password. And this is important for you to know when you are designing your identity management solution, that this hash password needs to be synchronized to the cloud. And this is, let's say, the simple way, because you accomplish that through configuring Azure AD Connect, and you don't need, in this case, to deploy some agents like in the second case, which in this case is the pass-through authentication. With pass-through authentication, it does requires some agents to be installed in your on-premises infrastructure. Okay, and these agents will be the one responsible for sensing out user authentication processes. Okay, and in this case, the authentication you have to take into account. The authentication is executed on premises through these agents, and this process is some of the most common process that is now implemented. It allows you to use integrates and enables you also to use from Azure AD Connect other options like single sign-on and other options too. And the third options for user authentication is using federation, which in this case is federated authentication. Basically, to understand is, okay, you have some users, some organization which has user accounts, and they requires to get access to another organization which has the resources like the applications. So in this case, these organizations that has a user account, it's the identity provider has all the identities they need to provide in order to get access to the applications. In federation terms, we are talking about identity providers getting access to the applications, which in this case is the Reliant party. Yeah, there are many configurations that it requires to be configured in ATFS. And that is why some organizations, okay, it's a more complex configuration than password hash, which is the simplest one, and the second, which is pass-through authentication. With federated authentications, you need to configure and publish all the applications that you want your users to get access to. Okay. Based on my experience, Active Directory pass-through authentication is in some case, let's say, replacing Active Directory Federation services. Okay, but I'm not saying that pass-through authentication is a better authentication mechanism than ATFS. ATFS is a very robust and has a lot of other options that allows you to configure. For example, if you require to provide smart card authentications to your end users, then ATFS is the right option. Okay, if you want, for example, to provide security and integrate federated authentication with ATFS, with some services like VPN, okay, or configure remote routing and access services or remote desktop services. These type of services are the ones that are integrated with ATFS. Okay, so the third question would be what kind of fault tolerance will you provide for getting access to resources? So it depends if we select password hash synchronization, pass-through authentication, or federated authentication. One of the points that I was forgetting about federation is that it requires a lot of complex configuration and a lot of servers. Okay, if you want to configure federated authentication. So, but anyway, if you want to provide fault tolerance, what happens if you lose connectivity with your Active Directory and you have pass-through authentication? Well, if you want to provide access and fault tolerance to fall back to, let's say, another authentication mechanism like password hash. So if you lose connectivity with your on-premises Active Directory and you have configured the pass-through authentication, the user authentication will fail. But if you have already configured previously in your Azure AD Connect password hash with pass-through authentication, then you can do the fallback. And when you can do the fallback, it requires some configuration, but it will require to be executed manually. Okay, it's not an automatic process. The switch to to pass-through to password hash synchronization is not automatic. You will need to switch the signing methods manually using Azure AD Connect. Just to finish, I have found that one of the best ways to work with the customers and to better understand is to draw in a whiteboard and explain them the pros and cons about selecting the different authentication mechanism. But basically, this is the one thing that you need to keep in mind. Once you are talking about disaster recovery, one thing that I learned when I was learning ITIL is about a concept for disaster recovery. When you are talking about disaster recovery, it's not time to think. It's only time to act. follow and specific guidelines and plan that has already been tested before, because when you are under a lot of pressure, there won't be time to think, just to act. So if you want to really provide the value and be ready in your organizations, you need to consider in your disaster recovery plan what options do you have available and the considerations that you need to take into account when defining this strategy. But well, this is the important part where you start designing your identity management solution. And these are like the basic things that you need to consider for selecting the right authentication mechanism with your Azure AD and when you are configuring hybrid identity solutions. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do it, and I will be sharing with you additional information if you are an end user or if you are an IT admin. I'm pretty sure that I will provide you some valuable information. So until the next video. Arnold Martinez.